Hello, Sambazaji. This is Sambaza with the Sambaza Podcast, and today is a weekend where we're doing a recap of what we have been listening to for the last week. I have with me 8 podcasts. I think this is because this is the last week of the podcasting, and I have one more that I missed for last week. Well, it's been a great week, and I'm going to go through the podcasts that we have done over the last week. But before we get there, I want to extend this pole or sorry to my good friends of the Two Broke Twimbos. But I was supposed to review their podcast last week and I missed it. I think when I went down the list, I kind of forgot. But anyway, here we go. Two Broke Twimbos. I liked their particular podcast and we met at Podfest and they were great. We have some conversation going on. Good things may come out of this. But one thing I like about their podcast is it's African. They have been doing for a while, and it's a great conversation. When you get in there, they're talking, even though they have a little bit of things that they speak about that is on the Zimbabwean context, right? You still are able to get what they're talking about, as some of the things are really part of the ecosystem of anywhere in the world that you can relate to. So I love this about this particular podcast. And when you listen to my review, I said they look like they're having a conversation in their home, right? You have this chemistry that is so much so that you feel like you're a fly on the wall. Listen to their podcast. Great podcast to listen to. Now, let's go into this week's podcast. Drum roll. What's Your Poison? John Savage, and this is from South Africa. Okay Kiasi from Kenya by Gadoni and her sisters. Ka-brazen, this is the Lamb Sisterhood. Seychelles, The Legacy of Slavery by Hajira Amla. South Africa Border Wars by Desmond Hatham or Des Hatham. The Unserious Podcast by Manny, who's from Nigeria, part of the APVA collective. Nipe Story by Kevin Mochiro, who is from Kenya, a great journalist, if I may add. Assorted Immigrant Stories by Zenith Hamamba Malawo. And she is a diasporan podcaster who is based in USA. All right, let's go break down the podcast. What's Your Poison? John Savage. I remember talking about this particular podcast and saying that he has one great thing that exemplifies organic advertising. Just ask your guest, who would you recommend to come to your show? And once he does that, he contacts you and then you get another guest to your show. I love that about this podcast, and it has been great to listen to your shows. And I can't say anything that's negative. Remember when I started, no negative comments. Everything is going to be positive, and we're looking to exemplify or exaggerate or talk about all the great things African podcasters are doing out there. Next is OK Kiasi, and this is by Gadoni and her sisters. Gadoni is part of the team in AfriPods, and she is also doing this podcast with her sisters, and it's a niche podcast of sisters who are coming from a blended family, and that's how she interviews the people who come to her show. Very nice stories that I had here. I already explained on the review how she talks to the guests. Nice presentation and stories of the way she asks the stories. Most of the people who are there are very comfortable in talking about their lives, and they're very, very vulnerable. Ka-brazen, the Lamb Sisterhood. These are Kenyan podcasters. They started off at the Africa Podfest. And I remember them, there were 3 girls. I remember them, and right now they're doing great. They have elevated their podcast. It used to be only in Swahili. Now they have a translation, English and Swahili, which makes your podcast much more marketable. And it expounds its reach. I love this podcast for kids, and I've already recommended it for any kids that would want to listen to this particular podcast. Seychelles, The Legacy of Slavery, 8-part limited series by Hajira Amla. I'm saying this because I kind of butchered the name before, but she is very organized, precise, and also detailed in what she talks about. Even though the podcast story is sad, she manages to give a lighter note to it. Remember, part of the story is about slavery, but there have been stories about triumphs of slavery, and knowing the names of the people who are there, it's not going to be the person who is not named. No, they put a name to it. And Seychelles has done a good job in trying to make it cultural, to bring things together. But at some point, I think they forgot that there's a history that is out there that people need to know. I wasn't taught anything about this in class, and I want to thank Amla, Miss Amla, for bringing this forward. And I think I had a great history lesson over here with this particular podcast. Sound, background sound, and everything, production on point, everything. South African border wars. We learned about these things a while ago when we were younger, but it never came up in when we study more. I guess if I was to study history of Africa, it would have come up more and more. However, this particular podcast by Days Hatham is from someone who actually experienced it. So it's firsthand experience of the war. Nothing that he is saying here will get you distracted off of it. I mean, when I started listening to it, I was like, okay, I'm going to listen to it. At first, it was okay. There's no surround. He does not add any background music or anything like that. So it's like a teacher teaching you a lecture in class, and that's kind of how I felt, and I enjoyed myself. I was like, wow, this is different, right? And coming from the other podcasts like the travel East Africa travel podcast, and also the which is part of the Diary of Mzungu, and then also the Seychelles and the history of slavery. These have background noise and after effects that make you want to get your interest. But this one is just plain. Just I'm talking and you're listening. I enjoyed it. Des, you did a great job here. And there are so many episodes that I haven't gotten to. I think I'm into 4 or 5 of the episodes, but I've learned a lot of history that I would not have learned in class. And this is what I talk about: African stories sent to you or being given to you by Africans who are either experiencing it, or stories that have been passed on that we're trying to bring out there and put them out there digitally. The Unserious Podcast. This young podcaster by the name Manny made everything lively on the podcast. I talked about the way he switched the podcast, made it different to where instead of using words, actually, he changed and started using his headshot on the podcast. Great episode, and I loved the stories he talked about, the art of lying, and also were things good, really good as they were. Finally, we talked about the Assorted Immigrant Stories, and these were from Zenith H. Malawa, Zenith Amamba Malawa. And Zenith talks about how immigrants moved from the continent of Africa and then went over to the US. And right now she's concentrating on people who are in the US, and hopefully maybe she'll upgrade and, or not upgrade, but switch up and do everything. Podcasting is open. Anyone can do anything with their podcast, as you can see. Um, Nipe Story. Nipe Story is by Kevin Mwachiro. Kevin Mwachiro is a great writer and podcaster, interviewer, and journalist. I love the stories that he told on Nipe Story. I followed his journey, and it's great. He has a lot of stories out there on his particular podcast, Nipe Story. This is an adult story for Africans. Fiction, some real. I would say go ahead and listen to it. PG 18, like I said, in my view. but great podcasts that are on a level that we have not experienced yet. Now, to sum it all up, with this week's episode, what I can summarize is that they have opened me up to knowing histories like the South African history, the Seychelles history. See, Sambazaji, when you start looking into things, you learn more and more. This is what I'm talking about. Then you have the Unserious Podcast that combines different podcasts that shows you how you can transform your podcast to talk about issues but not make them on a serious format. You can turn them into making them funny. Just like the Unserious Podcast, you have The Young God, and then you have Why Am I Single by Edgar. Check Edgar, right? So these are some of the podcasts that you see are coming along with what I'm listening to. John Savage's podcast also tells us about our musical, creatives. So you can focus on creatives. You can get a niche podcast like the Dhoni has created a niche podcast about blended families and then combine them to. I mean, look at the amount of stories that are being told in different compartments. I can compartmentalize one particular thing and bring out a story. And out of these particular stories, you can now expound on them and make great podcasting. Some of these podcasters will eventually may stop, some will continue. But what I say is, or as the t-shirt says, keep podcasting. With that, Wasambazaji, I will say, let's go ahead and keep podcasting. And it has been a great week 4. Thank you, Sambazaji, for tuning in. And we'll see you later for our final recap. By the way, there is somebody we're looking for to bring to this particular show. Bye, Wasambazaji. So, with that, Wasambazaji,